A poor girl approached a millionaire and said, "Don't go to your meeting, or a tragedy will happen." The next morning, a luxury car pulled up to her humble home. The rain was a gentle drizzle, making the streets of São Paulo shimmer under the golden glow of streetlights. Nathaniel Reed stood in front of his luxurious glass-walled mansion. Lost in thought, his day had been a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and numbers. Just like every other day, success had been his constant companion. Yet tonight, as he gazed at the towering cityscape, something felt off. Adjusting his tailored jacket, Nathaniel turned to step back inside when a small voice pierced through the hum of the rain. "Excuse me, sir," the voice said, soft yet clear. He stopped and turned. Standing at the edge of his perfectly manicured driveway was a little girl. Her rain-soaked dress clung to her tiny frame, and her shoes looked worn, almost threadbare. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. Bright, unwavering, and far too wise for someone so young. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. The girl took a hesitant step forward. "You shouldn't go to that meeting tomorrow," she said, her voice steady despite the absurdity of her statement. Nathaniel blinked. "What did you just say?" "The meeting. You shouldn't go," she repeated, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that made him pause. "Something bad will happen." For a moment, the world seemed to still. Nathaniel stared at the child, trying to process her words. How did she know about the meeting? It was confidential, known only to a select few in his company. Yet here she was, a stranger, standing in the rain with an inexplicable warning. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice firmer now. "Is this some kind of joke?" The girl shook her head. "No joke, just please don't go." Nathaniel studied her for a moment longer, his instincts warring with logic. Then, before he could question her further, she turned and ran off into the rain, disappearing into the shadows of the bustling city. The following morning, Nathaniel couldn't shake the memory of the girl's warning. It lingered in his mind as he reviewed the agenda for the day. The meeting she'd mentioned was scheduled for noon, a high-stakes discussion with a potential investor group that could make or break a major deal. His assistant, Laura, noticed his distraction. "Everything all right, Mr. Reed?" she asked, placing a cup of espresso on his desk. Nathaniel hesitated. "Laura, what do we know about the investors we're meeting today? Do a thorough background check, everything." Laura raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I'll look into it right away." As the clock inched closer to noon, Laura returned, her expression unusually tense. "Sir, I think you should see this," she said, handing him a folder. Nathaniel flipped through the documents, his eyes narrowing with every page. The group, presented as legitimate investors, had ties to fraudulent activities and corporate sabotage. This wasn't a meeting. It was a trap. The girl had been right. Nathaniel's chest tightened as he leaned back in his chair. If he hadn't heeded her warning, his company's reputation, and perhaps even his personal safety, could have been in jeopardy. The realization hit him hard. "Cancel the meeting," he instructed Laura, his voice firm, "and notify security." That evening, as the city buzzed with life, Nathaniel found himself standing outside his mansion once more, staring at the driveway where the mysterious girl had appeared. He couldn't ignore what had happened. She had saved him, and he owed her answers. Driven by curiosity and gratitude, he contacted a private investigator. Within hours, the investigator reported back with a lead. The girl had been seen entering a small apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He drove himself there, the polished black car standing out in the modest neighborhood. As he climbed the creaking stairs of the building, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness. Who was she? And why had she helped him? When he knocked on the faded door, it creaked open to reveal a woman. Her features were delicate, her dark hair framing a face that struck him like a bolt of lightning. It was a face he had once known, intimately. "Painfully, Madison?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Her eyes widened in shock, mirroring his disbelief. "Nathaniel." Time seemed to stand still as they stared at each other, both struggling to comprehend the impossible reunion. But before either could speak, a small voice interrupted. "Mommy, who is he?" Nathaniel's gaze shifted to the girl standing beside Madison, the same bright-eyed child who had warned him just the night before. "She's your daughter?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. Madison hesitated, her expression conflicted. Finally, she nodded. Yes, her name is Harper. Nathaniel's world tilted on its axis. The girl who had saved him wasn't just a stranger. She was his daughter. Nathaniel stood frozen in the doorway, his mind reeling. Harper's wide, curious eyes darted between him and her mother. Madison's expression was a mix of shock and guarded caution, as if she wasn't entirely sure whether to let him in or slam the door shut. "Nathaniel," Madison said again, this time with a steadier tone. "What are you doing here?" The question snapped him out of his stupor. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice almost pleading. "Can I come in?" Madison hesitated, her hand still gripping the edge of the door. Harper looked up at her mother, then back at Nathaniel, curiosity etched on her young face. "Mommy," Harper asked softly, "is he a friend?" The innocence in her voice hit Nathaniel like a punch to the chest. A friend. He wanted to say so much more than that, but the truth wasn't his to claim. Not yet. Madison finally sighed and stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The apartment was small but warm, with mismatched furniture and the faint smell of lavender lingering in the air. It was a stark contrast to the cold luxury of Nathaniel's own home, yet it felt infinitely more alive. Nathaniel sat down cautiously on a worn couch, unsure where to start. Madison remained standing, her arms crossed, while Harper perched on a chair nearby, watching him with the same intensity she'd displayed the night before. "I'm not sure how to begin," Nathaniel admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But last night, Harper came to my house. She warned me about something that saved me." Madison's brow furrowed as she glanced at her daughter. "Harper, is this true?" Harper nodded solemnly. "I told him not to go to that meeting. I just knew it wasn't safe." Nathaniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "How did you know, Harper? That meeting was private. There's no way you could have known unless someone told you." Harper hesitated, looking at her mother for reassurance. Madison crouched beside her, placing a gentle hand on her knee. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell us." Harper took a deep breath. "I read about it in the journal." Nathaniel's head snapped up. "Journal?" Madison's face turned pale, her eyes widening as realization dawned. "You mean my journal?" Harper nodded. "It talked about him," she said, pointing at Nathaniel. "About the things he used to do and the people he worked with when I saw the names in the meeting." I remembered. Nathaniel's chest tightened. A journal Madison had written about him. "Madison," he said softly, his voice laced with emotion. "Why would you write about me? And why didn't you tell me you were alive?" Madison's jaw tightened, and she stood, her posture defensive. "Because I didn't have a choice, Nathaniel. My grandmother, Dorothy, made sure of that." The mention of Dorothy sent a chill down Nathaniel's spine. He had met her only a few times, but her stern demeanor and calculating eyes had always unsettled him. "After the avalanche," Madison continued, her voice wavering, "I was rescued, but Dorothy told everyone, including you, that I had died. She thought you were a distraction, someone who would ruin my future. She wanted me to go to college, to build a career she could be proud of, and when I refused, she made sure I didn't have anywhere else to turn." Nathaniel's fists clenched. "She lied to me. She told me you were gone. I mourned you, Madison. I thought I lost you forever." Madison's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I wanted to reach out to you. I tried, Nathaniel, but she made it impossible. By the time I finally broke free of her control, too much time had passed. I didn't know if you'd even want to see me." Nathaniel's voice was firm. "Of course I would have. You were everything to me." The room fell silent, the weight of their shared pain filling the air. Harper fidgeted in her chair, her gaze darting between her parents. "Does this mean you knew each other before?" Nathaniel smiled softly, though it was tinged with sadness. "Yes, Harper. Your mom and I, we loved each other very much." Harper tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "So, are you my dad?" The question hung in the air, and Nathaniel felt his throat tighten. He looked at Madison, who seemed frozen in place, her hands gripping the back of a chair. "Yes," Madison finally whispered. "He's your dad." Harper's eyes widened. and she looked at Nathaniel with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. Really? Nathaniel knelt in front of her, his heart pounding. I didn't know, Harper. If I had, I would have been here. I promise. Harper studied him for a long moment, then surprised him by throwing her arms around his neck. I'm glad you're here now, she said softly. Nathaniel hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with emotions he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in what seemed like forever, he felt like he had something real, something worth fighting for. But as he looked up at Madison, he saw the fear still lingering in her eyes. He knew their reunion was only the beginning. There were still wounds to heal, truths to uncover, and a lifetime of lost moments to make up for. Nathaniel remained on the worn couch long after Harper had fallen asleep in Madison's lap. The little girl's trust, so immediate and unconditional, had filled a part of him he hadn't realized was empty. But now, as the room quieted, the weight of the unspoken between him and Madison grew heavier. Madison carefully shifted Harper, carrying her to a small bedroom down the hall. When she returned, she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her expression guarded. She trusts you already, Madison said softly, her voice a mix of awe and apprehension. She doesn't do that with everyone. Nathaniel looked at her, his eyes soft but resolute. She's incredible, Madison. You've done an amazing job raising her. Madison gave a small, sad smile and crossed the room to sit in the armchair opposite him. It hasn't been easy, but she's the reason I kept going. Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Tell me everything, Madison. I need to know how we ended up here. I need to understand why Dorothy kept us apart. Madison took a deep breath, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. After the avalanche, I woke up in a hospital in a small town near the Serra da Mantiqueira. I was injured but alive. I asked for you, but Dorothy was the one who showed up. She told me you were fine, that you'd moved on, she said. She said it was better that way. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. She lied to both of us. She didn't just lie, Nathaniel, Madison said, her voice trembling with anger. She took everything, my ID, my phone, anything that connected me to you. She convinced the hospital staff to discharge me into her care, claiming I was mentally unstable. I didn't have the strength to fight her. I was lost, grieving you, and she took advantage of that. Nathaniel's fists clenched. The thought of Madison being manipulated, isolated, and left to fend for herself made his blood boil. Why would she do that? What could she possibly gain? Madison hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. Control. She always wanted control. She hated how much I loved you because it meant I wasn't listening to her. She wanted me to follow her path. College, a career, a life she could boast about. And you were the opposite of everything she valued. She saw you as a threat. Nathaniel leaned back, running a hand through his hair. I should have known. I should have questioned her when she told me you were gone. But I was so devastated I didn't think straight. I just believed her. Madison's expression softened slightly. It wasn't your fault. Dorothy is manipulative. She has a way of making you doubt everything, even yourself. Nathaniel looked up at her, his eyes full of regret. If I'd known, if I'd even suspected, I would have searched the ends of the earth for you. Madison gave him a sad smile. I know that now, but back then it felt like I was completely alone. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city outside. Then Nathaniel broke the silence. How did you get away from her? Madison's eyes darkened. It took years, at first. I thought if I played along, she'd eventually let me have some freedom. But she only tightened her grip. When I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. She wanted me to give Harper up for adoption. She said having a child would ruin my life. Nathaniel's breath hitched. She said that. Madison nodded, her jaw tightening. That was the last straw. I knew I couldn't stay under her control anymore. So, one night, I packed a bag and left. I had nothing. No money, no plan. But I couldn't let her decide Harper's future. Nathaniel's chest tightened as he imagined Madison, pregnant and alone, fleeing from the woman who had torn them apart. How did you survive? Madison shrugged, though her voice betrayed the effort it had taken. I found work wherever I could, cleaning houses, waitressing, anything to keep a roof over our heads. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. Harper became my world, and as long as she was safe, I didn't care how hard things got. Nathaniel leaned forward, his eyes full of admiration. "You're incredible. Madison, what you've done for her, for both of you. I don't know how to even begin to make up for the time we've lost." Madison met his gaze, her expression softening. "You don't have to make up for anything, Nathaniel. What's done is done. But if you want to be part of Harper's life now, you need to prove that you're here for the long haul." "I will," he said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes, I'll do it. I want to be her father, Madison. And I want to be here for you, too." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "It's not going to be easy. Harper might have warmed up to you quickly, but she's still just a kid. And me. I've spent years building walls to protect myself. It's going to take time." Nathaniel nodded. "I'm not afraid of hard work. You know that?" Madison chuckled softly. "No, you never were." For the first time that night, the tension between them eased. They sat in silence, the weight of their shared history settling between them. Nathaniel knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had something real to fight for. The morning light filtered through the small apartment's thin curtains, casting soft rays across the room. Nathaniel woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. It was a sound he hadn't heard in what felt like forever, and for a moment, it filled him with a warmth he didn't know he needed. As he stepped into the modest kitchen, he found Harper perched on a stool, her small hands gripping a piece of toast, while Madison moved about, preparing breakfast. Harper was giggling at something her mother had said, her laughter infectious. Madison noticed Nathaniel standing in the doorway and paused, her expression shifting to something unreadable. "You're up early," Madison said, her voice neutral. Nathaniel gave a small smile. "I couldn't sleep much. It's been a lot to take in." Harper looked up at him with bright eyes. "Did you dream about us?" she asked innocently, her head tilted in curiosity. Nathaniel chuckled and pulled out a chair at the small table. "Not exactly, but I was thinking about you both," Harper beamed, clearly pleased with his answer. Madison, on the other hand, focused on pouring coffee, her movements deliberate. The unspoken tension between the adults was palpable, but Harper seemed blissfully unaware. After breakfast, Nathaniel found himself sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and sheets of paper. Harper had insisted he join her in drawing, and despite himself, he couldn't refuse. "You're really bad at this," Harper said with a giggle, holding up her drawing of a house and comparing it to his lopsided stick figures. Nathaniel laughed, shaking his head. "Hey, I'm a businessman, not an artist." "Mommy says you're super rich," Harper said casually, as if commenting on the weather. Nathaniel paused, unsure how to respond. "Well, I've been fortunate in my work, but that's not the most important thing." Harper looked up at him with wide eyes. "What's more important?" He hesitated, his mind racing. How could he explain to a child that all the wealth in the world felt meaningless compared to the chance to be here with her? "Family," he said finally. "People who matter to you." Harper studied him for a moment, then nodded as if accepting his answer. "Like Mommy and me." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Exactly like you and your mom." Throughout the day, Nathaniel watched Harper with a growing sense of awe. She was bright, curious, and brimming with energy. She asked questions about everything, from his favorite color to what he did for work. Her innocent curiosity was a stark contrast to the rigid, calculated conversations Nathaniel was used to in his corporate world. As the afternoon wore on, Harper tugged on his sleeve, her small hand pulling him toward a shelf filled with books and trinkets. She pointed to a worn photo frame, the glass slightly cracked. Inside was a picture of Madison holding a much younger Harper. "That's when we lived in a smaller place," Harper explained. "Mommy said we didn't have much money, but we were happy." Nathaniel picked up the frame, his fingers brushing over the image. The sight of Madison smiling, holding their daughter, his daughter, was almost too much to bear. He set it down carefully, his voice soft. "You've always had a wonderful mom." Harper nodded enthusiastically. "She's the best, but..." She hesitated, her gaze dropping. "Sometimes I wondered if I did something wrong, if that's why I didn't have a dad." The words hit Nathaniel like a punch to the gut. He knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "Harper, you didn't do anything wrong. Not one single thing. If I had known about you, I would have been here. I promise." Her eyes searched his, and after a moment, she smiled. Okay. It was a simple word, but it carried a weight that made Nathaniel's heart ache. He would spend the rest of his life proving to her that he meant every word. That evening, Madison watched from the doorway as Nathaniel helped Harper with a puzzle on the floor. The way he interacted with her, patient and attentive, stirred something deep within her. She had spent years building walls to protect herself and Harper, but seeing them together made those walls feel fragile. When Harper finally went to bed, Madison and Nathaniel sat on opposite ends of the couch, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. "She's taken to you faster than I expected," Madison admitted, breaking the quiet. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "She's an incredible kid, that's all you." Madison shook her head. "It's not just me. She sees something in you. Something good." Nathaniel turned to her, his expression serious. "I'm going to be here for her, Madison. And for you. I know I can't change the past, but I want to make things right." Madison looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of a pillow. "I don't know if I can trust that yet. I've spent so many years doing this on my own, letting someone in again. It's terrifying." Nathaniel's voice softened. "I understand, but I'm not going anywhere, not this time." Madison met his gaze, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. It wasn't a promise she could fully accept yet, but it was a start. The morning sun poured through the thin curtains, filling the small apartment with a golden glow. Nathaniel woke to the sound of Harper's giggles coming from the kitchen as he dressed and stepped into the living room. He found Madison standing at the stove, preparing breakfast, while Harper sat on a stool, her legs swinging back and forth. "Good morning," Nathaniel said, his voice still heavy with sleep but carrying a warmth that felt foreign to him. Harper turned and grinned. "Morning, Mommy's making pancakes." Madison glanced over her shoulder. "Hope you're hungry. Harper insisted you stay for breakfast." Nathaniel smiled, feeling a pang of something he couldn't quite identify. Was this what mornings could have been like if they hadn't been separated? Pushing the thought aside, he took a seat at the small table, Harper immediately sliding over to sit beside him. As they ate, Nathaniel couldn't help but notice Harper's endless curiosity. She peppered him with questions about his life, his work, and even his favorite color. He answered each one with patience, finding her enthusiasm contagious. "Do you always wear suits?" she asked, her head tilted. Nathaniel chuckled. "Most of the time, it's kind of part of the job." Harper wrinkled her nose. "That sounds boring. You should wear pajamas to work." Madison laughed softly, a sound that made Nathaniel's chest tighten. "If only the business world were that simple," he said, smiling at both of them after breakfast. Harper dragged Nathaniel to her small shelf of books and trinkets, insisting he see her most special things. Among them was a worn teddy bear missing an ear, a collection of seashells, and a small notebook filled with drawings. "This one's my favorite," she said, holding up a picture she'd drawn of a tall man holding hands with a smaller girl. "It's us." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "You drew this." Harper nodded proudly. "I wanted to know what it would be like to have a dad." Nathaniel knelt down, his voice soft. "Harper, I know I wasn't here before, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes searched his face, as if looking for any hint of insincerity. Then she smiled and threw her arms around his neck. "I'm glad." The embrace lasted only a moment, but it left Nathaniel feeling both elated and heartbroken. He hadn't realized just how much he'd missed until now. Later that day, while Harper was occupied with her drawings, Nathaniel pulled Madison aside. "There's something I need to know," he began. "Why didn't you try to contact me after Harper was born? Was it all Dorothy?" Madison sighed, leaning against the counter. "It wasn't just her. By the time I found out I was pregnant, I had nothing. No money, no way to reach you. Dorothy had made sure of that. And after Harper was born, I was terrified. What if you didn't want us? What if you'd moved on?" Nathaniel's expression softened. "I would never have turned my back on you, Madison, or Harper." She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "I know that now, but back then, it felt like the safest thing was to protect Harper from more heartbreak." Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to protect her from me. I want to be part of her life, both of your lives." Madison met his gaze, the vulnerability in her eyes clear. She's already so attached to you. I'm scared of what happens if you leave." "I won't," Nathaniel said without hesitation. "You have my word." That evening, Madison handed Nathaniel a stack of old photographs. "These are from when Harper was younger. I thought you might want to see them." Nathaniel took the photos carefully, his fingers brushing over the edges as he studied each one. There was Harper as a baby, her chubby cheeks and wide eyes unmistakable. Another showed her taking her first steps. Madison crouched in the background with open arms. Each image told a story of a life he hadn't been part of, and the weight of that realization settled heavily on his chest. "She's been through so much," Madison said softly, sitting beside him. "And yet, she's always been so full of life. I don't know how I got so lucky." Nathaniel glanced at her, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the reason she's the way she is. You gave her everything you could." Madison's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I tried, and you succeeded," Nathaniel said, his tone firm. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore." As the night wore on, Harper joined them on the couch, her small body curling up between them as they flipped through more photos. It was a simple moment, but for Nathaniel, it felt monumental, a glimpse of what life could have been, and what it might still become. As Harper drifted off to sleep, her head resting against Nathaniel's arm, Madison spoke quietly. "She's never had this before. Someone else to lean on." Nathaniel looked down at Harper, his expression resolute. "I'll be here for her, for both of you no matter what." Madison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." It was a small word, but it carried a world of meaning. Nathaniel knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt like they were on the same path. Together, the morning after their quiet evening together, Nathaniel awoke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The bond he was building with Harper was growing stronger, and Madison, though cautious, was beginning to trust him. But as much as he wanted to focus on their future, there was an unresolved shadow looming over their past. Dorothy Brown, sipping coffee in the small kitchen while Madison prepared Harper for school. Nathaniel opened his phone and searched for Dorothy's contact. The number was still saved, though it hadn't been used in years. His thumb hovered over the call button for a moment before he pressed it. The phone rang twice before a sharp, familiar voice answered. "Nathaniel, to what do I owe this unexpected call?" The same condescending tone, the same air of control. He gritted his teeth. "We need to talk, Dorothy, face to face." There was a brief pause, then a calculated response. "I didn't think we had anything left to discuss, but if you insist, I'm free this afternoon." "Good. I'll come to you." He hung up before she could say anything else. Later that day, Nathaniel found himself pulling into the circular driveway of Dorothy's sprawling estate. The house was as imposing as he remembered, grandiose, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. A butler opened the door, ushering him into a sitting room where Dorothy waited, perched on an ornate chair like a queen on her throne. "Nathaniel?" she greeted, her thin lips curling into a smile. "It's been far too long." He ignored the pleasantries, his voice sharp. "You lied to me, Dorothy. You told me Madison was dead. You tore us apart. And for what? Your twisted idea of what's best." Dorothy's smile faltered, but her composure remained intact. "I did what I had to do. Madison was young, impressionable, and throwing her life away on a relationship that had no future." Nathaniel's fists clenched. "No future. We loved each other. We had a future together, and you stole that from us." Dorothy raised an eyebrow, her expression cool. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Nathaniel. It doesn't build a stable life. Madison deserved more than a whirlwind romance. She needed direction, structure, and you decided you were the one to provide it," he snapped, "by isolating her, lying to both of us, and destroying everything we had." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't act so innocent. You were so wrapped up in your own ambitions that you didn't even question my story. You accepted her death without a second thought." The accusation struck a nerve, but Nathaniel refused to let her deflect. "I believed you because I trusted you. You exploited that trust, and now Madison and Harper are the ones who've suffered for it." At the mention of Harper, Dorothy's expression briefly faltered. "I didn't know about the child." Nathaniel seized on the crack in her armor. "No, you didn't, because Madison had to run from you to protect her. She had nothing because of you, and she still managed to raise the most incredible little girl. Do you even realize what you've done to them? To me, Dorothy's lips pressed into a thin line, her usual confidence shaken. I did what I thought was right. Well, you were wrong, Nathaniel said firmly. And now you're going to stay out of their lives. You've done enough damage. Dorothy's gaze hardened. Do you really think Madison will just forgive you? You abandoned her just as much as I did. Do you think you can waltz back into their lives and play the hero? Nathaniel straightened, his voice calm but resolute. I'm not trying to play the hero. I'm trying to make things right, something you've never bothered to do. Dorothy leaned back in her chair, her eyes cold. Madison has always been emotional, impulsive. She'll let you back in, but don't think it will last. You'll disappoint her again. Men like you always do. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he refused to rise to her bait. This isn't about me. It's about Harper, and I won't let you poison her life the way you did Madison's. For the first time. Dorothy seemed genuinely unsettled. She opened her mouth to respond, but Nathaniel cut her off. Stay away from them, Dorothy. You've done enough harm. It's time for you to let them live their lives, without you. He turned and walked out, leaving Dorothy sitting in her grand, empty house as he drove away. He felt a surge of determination. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for the future, for Madison, for Harper, and for the family they deserved to have. When Nathaniel returned to Madison's apartment that evening, she was sitting at the table, sorting through paperwork. She looked up as he entered, her brow furrowing at his tense expression. "Where were you?" she asked. "I went to see Dorothy," he said, his voice steady. Madison's eyes widened. "You? What? Why?" "I needed to confront her, to tell her to stay away from you and Harper." Madison set down the papers, her hands trembling slightly. "Nathaniel, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said firmly. "She's done enough damage. I won't let her hurt either of you again." Madison stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his. Finally, she nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you." Nathaniel crossed the room and took her hand. "I meant what I said, Madison. I'm here for you, for Harper, whatever it takes." She looked down at their joined hands, then back at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I'm starting to believe you." The soft hum of traffic outside Madison's apartment was the only sound in the room as Nathaniel sat on the couch. Flipping through a book Harper had handed him earlier, it was a collection of children's stories, complete with bright, colorful illustrations. He smiled as he imagined Harper picking it out at a local market, her excitement evident in the way she had explained each story to him. But as the evening settled into a quiet calm, Harper emerged from her room holding a worn, leather-bound notebook. Her small hands clutched it tightly as she approached Nathaniel, her face unusually serious. "Daddy," she said, her voice soft and tentative. Nathaniel's heart skipped at the word. Though she had only started calling him that recently, it never failed to fill him with a sense of pride and overwhelming responsibility. He set the book aside and turned to her, his full attention on the little girl standing before him. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Harper hesitated, glancing over at Madison, who was in the kitchen washing dishes. Lowering her voice, she leaned in closer. "I have something to show you, but you can't tell Mommy." Nathaniel frowned, unsure of what could be so secretive. "Why can't I tell her?" "Because she doesn't know I read it," Harper explained, her tone conspiratorial. "It's her journal." Nathaniel's breath caught. "Her journal," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Harper nodded and held it out to him. "It talks about you. That's how I knew who you were." Nathaniel took the journal, his hands slightly trembling. The leather cover was worn, the edges frayed from years of handling. He opened it to the first page, where Madison's neat handwriting filled the lines. It was dated years ago, not long after the avalanche. As he skimmed the entries, his chest tightened with every word. Madison had written about their love, their plans for the future, and the devastating moment she thought she'd lost him forever. She had poured her pain, her anger, and her longing onto these pages, creating a vivid account of the years they had been apart. "She wrote a lot about you," Harper said, her voice breaking the silence. "That's how I knew you were my daddy." Nathaniel glanced up at her, his throat tight. "Did you read all of it?" Harper shook her head. "Just some parts, the ones that talked about you." Nathaniel closed the journal carefully, his emotions swirling. "Thank you for showing me this, Harper. But I think Mommy should know we're reading it. It's her journal, and it's personal." Harper bit her lip, clearly torn. "Okay, but can you ask her what happened to the snow place? She wrote about it a lot." "The snow place?" Nathaniel asked, confused. "The avalanche," Harper clarified. "She said that's where everything went wrong." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I'll talk to her. But next time, we'll ask before we read her things, all right?" Harper nodded solemnly. "All right." That evening, after Harper had gone to bed, Nathaniel approached Madison cautiously. She was sitting at the table, sorting through more paperwork, a mug of tea steaming beside her. "Madison," he began, setting the journal on the table. "Harper showed me this." Madison froze, her eyes locking on the journal. "She found it." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "She did," Nathaniel confirmed. "And she read parts of it, the parts about me." Madison closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "I didn't think she'd ever find it. I wrote it during some of the hardest years of my life." Nathaniel hesitated before speaking again. "It's incredible." "Madison, painful, yes, but honest. It's clear how much you loved me, how much you missed me." Her eyes opened and she gave a bittersweet smile. "I did love you, Nathaniel. I never stopped. Even when I was angry, even when I felt abandoned, I still loved you." Her words struck him deeply, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I'm sorry you went through all of that alone. I can't change what happened, but I want to make things right now." Madison's fingers tightened around his, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. "Reading it won't be easy," she warned. "There's a lot in there, things I didn't even realize I was feeling until I wrote them down." "I want to know everything," Nathaniel said firmly. "I need to understand what you went through, not just for me, but for Harper. She deserves the best version of me." Madison's eyes softened, and she nodded. "All right, but if you're going to read it, you need to know. I didn't hold back. There's anger, regret, love. It's all in there." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." That night, as Madison slept and Harper dreamed in the next room, Nathaniel sat in the dim light of the living room, the journal open in his lap. Each entry was a window into Madison's heart, her words painting a vivid picture of her struggles, her triumphs, and her unwavering love for Harper. It was a story of resilience and heartbreak, but also of hope. One entry stood out, dated just after Harper's birth. "I named her Harper because it reminds me of music, of the melodies we used to listen to together. She's my song now, the only thing keeping me going. I wish Nathaniel could see her. I wish he could know how much she looks like him." Tears blurred Nathaniel's vision as he closed the journal. He wiped his eyes and looked toward the bedrooms, where the two most important people in his life now slept. He didn't know how he would make up for the years they had lost, but he vowed to himself that he would try. Every single day, the morning sunlight filtered through the small apartment, casting a warm glow across the living room where Nathaniel sat. The journal lay closed on the table in front of him, its worn leather cover holding the weight of years of untold pain and longing. He had spent the entire night reading Madison's words, and now, as the apartment stirred to life around him, he was left grappling with the enormity of what he had learned. Harper's laughter echoed from the kitchen, where Madison was busy making breakfast. The sound brought a faint smile to Nathaniel's face, but it did little to ease the ache in his chest. He stood and made his way to the kitchen, determined to confront the lingering doubts and unspoken truths between him and Madison. Madison looked up from the stove as he entered, her expression cautious. "You're up early." Nathaniel nodded, leaning against the counter. "I didn't sleep much. I spent most of the night reading your journal." Her hands stilled, and she turned off the stove, placing the pan aside. "I figured you would," she said quietly, her voice neutral. Nathaniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It was a lot. Reading it felt like I was living through those years with you. The pain, the struggle, the love. It's all there." Madison crossed her arms, her gaze guarded. "I wrote those things for myself, Nathaniel. They were never meant for you to see." "I know," he said quickly, "and I'm sorry if it feels like I invaded your privacy, but I needed to understand what you went through. I needed to see how I failed you, her brow furrowed, a mix of frustration and sadness flashing in her eyes. It wasn't just you, Nathaniel. It was everything. Dorothy, the circumstances, my own fear. But that doesn't mean it's easy for me to trust you now. Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice soft but resolute. I understand that, Madison, and I don't expect you to trust me overnight. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, no matter how long it takes. Harper bounded into the room, her bright energy breaking the tension. Are we going to the park today, Mommy? Madison gave her a warm smile, her walls temporarily dropping. Yes, we are. Just let me finish breakfast, okay? Harper turned to Nathaniel, her excitement infectious. You're coming too, right, Daddy? Nathaniel's heart swelled at the word, and he nodded. Of course I wouldn't miss it for the world. Madison glanced at him, her expression unreadable, before returning to her task. The morning passed in a flurry of preparations, and soon they were on their way to the park. Harper's laughter filling the car as they drove through the bustling streets of São Paulo. At the park, Harper raced ahead to the playground, her joy contagious. Nathaniel and Madison sat on a nearby bench, their eyes following her every move. For a moment, it felt like a glimpse into the life they could have had, a life of shared love and simple happiness. She's incredible, Nathaniel said, breaking the silence. Every time I look at her, I see you. Madison gave a small smile but didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on Harper, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I know you're still unsure about me, Nathaniel continued, his tone gentle. And I don't blame you. I can't imagine how hard it's been for you, raising her on your own. Madison finally looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. It wasn't easy. There were days when I didn't know if we'd make it. But Harper, she gave me strength. She was my reason to keep going. Nathaniel reached for her hand, his touch light but steady. And now, I want to be your reason too. I want to help you carry this weight, Madison. Let me be part of your life again. She pulled her hand away, her expression conflicted. I want to believe you, Nathaniel. I really do. But it's not that simple. Harper's already so attached to you. And if you leave, her voice broke, and she looked away, blinking back tears. I can't let her go through that. I can't let myself go through that. Nathaniel's chest tightened at her words. I'm not leaving, he said firmly. I know I can't erase the past, but I can promise you this. I'm here, and I'm staying. Madison shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not just about staying, Nathaniel. It's about proving that you mean it. Words are easy. Actions take time. Their conversation was interrupted by Harper running up to them, her cheeks flushed and her hair flying in all directions. Look what I found, she exclaimed, holding up a small, colorful flower. Madison smiled through her tears and took the flower, her fingers brushing Harper's. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Nathaniel watched the exchange, his heart aching. He knew Madison's doubt wasn't born from bitterness, but from years of hardship and fear, and he knew the only way to earn her trust was to show her, day by day, moment by moment, that he wasn't going anywhere. As they left the park, Harper holding both of their hands, Nathaniel felt a glimmer of hope. It was a small step, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The days following their trip to the park were a mixture of tentative progress and subtle tension. Harper seemed to thrive with Nathaniel around, her excitement bubbling over at every interaction. For Nathaniel, her presence was a light he hadn't realized he needed. But Madison's guarded demeanor remained a constant reminder of the long road ahead. One morning, as Madison worked on some paperwork at the kitchen table, Harper tugged on Nathaniel's sleeve. Daddy, can we do something fun today? Nathaniel crouched to meet her eyes. What kind of fun? Harper grinned, her imagination clearly running wild. A picnic, with sandwiches and juice, and maybe we can fly a kite. Nathaniel smiled, her enthusiasm contagious. That sounds like a great idea. What do you think, Madison? He asked, turning to her. Madison looked up from her papers, her expression softening at Harper's excitement. If that's what you want, I suppose we can make it happen. The afternoon was perfect. Nathaniel drove them to a quiet park just outside the city, a large grassy field bordered by tall trees. Madison spread out a blanket. While Nathaniel unpacked the basket Harper had insisted they fill with only the best picnic food. a mix of sandwiches, fruit, and cookies. As they ate, Harper chattered nonstop, her words a mix of observations, questions, and wild stories. Nathaniel and Madison exchanged occasional smiles, their shared amusement at Harper's antics creating a fragile but hopeful connection. After the meal, Harper pulled out the kite Nathaniel had bought on their way to the park. She raced across the field, her laughter ringing out as Nathaniel ran alongside her. Helping the kite catch the wind, Madison watched from the blanket, her heart warming at the sight of them together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the park, Harper flopped onto the blanket, her energy finally spent. "That was the best day ever," she declared, her cheeks pink from exertion. Nathaniel chuckled, sitting beside her. "I'm glad you had fun." Madison sat quietly, watching them with a faint smile. But as Harper closed her eyes, drifting into a contented nap, her expression grew more serious. "Nathaniel," she said softly, so as not to wake Harper, "this is what she's always wanted. Someone to play with, to make her laugh, but it scares me." He looked at her, his brows furrowing. "What scares you?" "This," she said, gesturing to the scene around them. "The idea that it could all fall apart, that she'll get used to having you here, and then one day, you'll be gone." Her voice broke on the last word, and she quickly looked away, blinking back tears. Nathaniel shifted closer, his tone gentle but firm. "Madison, I know I can't undo the years we lost, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you." She let out a shaky breath, her hands twisting in her lap. I've had to be strong for so long, for her and for me, letting someone else in. It's hard." Nathaniel reached for her hand, covering it with his own. "You don't have to do it all alone anymore. Let me help carry some of that weight." Madison didn't pull away, though she didn't fully relax either. "It's not just about me. It's about Harper. If you leave..." "I won't," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice resolute. "I love her, Madison, and I love you. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that if I have to." Her eyes softened, though the doubt still lingered. "I want to believe that, I really do." On the drive home, Harper dozed in the back seat, her head resting against the window. Madison sat quietly beside Nathaniel, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with things left unsaid. As they reached the apartment, Nathaniel carried a sleepy Harper inside and gently laid her on the couch. Madison followed, watching as he carefully tucked a blanket around her. The sight of him, so attentive and caring, stirred something deep within her, a flicker of hope, fragile but persistent. That evening, after Harper had gone to bed, Nathaniel and Madison sat together in the living room, the faint hum of the city filling the quiet space. Madison spoke first, her voice hesitant. "You've been good for her," she admitted. "She's happier than I've seen her in a long time." Nathaniel met her gaze, his expression earnest. "She's an incredible kid. That's because of you." Madison shook her head. "I've done my best, but I'm not perfect. There were times I didn't know if I could give her what she needed. You gave her everything," Nathaniel said firmly. "And now, I want to help. For both of you." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, but it's going to take time, Nathaniel, for me to trust this, to trust you. I'll give you all the time you need," he promised. That night, as Madison lay in bed, she couldn't stop replaying the day in her mind, the way Nathaniel had run with Harper, his laughter blending with hers, the way he had looked at her, not with judgment or pity, but with genuine care. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future together. The following morning began peacefully, the small apartment alive with the usual sounds of Harper's chatter and Madison bustling around the kitchen. Nathaniel joined them at the table, sipping his coffee as Harper outlined her plans for the day, which included drawing a whole family picture. "Now that Daddy is here," Nathaniel's heart swelled at her words, but he noticed the flicker of unease in Madison's eyes. Though she didn't voice it, the doubt remained, a quiet shadow that lingered between them. Their fragile harmony, however, was disrupted when Madison's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. Without a word, she picked it up and stepped into the hallway, her voice low as she answered the call. Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" he asked when she returned a few minutes later. Madison hesitated, her hands clutching the edge of the counter. "It was Dorothy," she said finally, her tone tight. Harper, who had been happily drawing at the table, looked up at the name. "Who's Dorothy?" Madison forced a small smile. "She's someone Mommy used to know, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." Nathaniel stood, crossing the room to stand beside her. What did she want? Madison's eyes flashed with frustration. She said she wanted to talk, that she deserved to be part of Harper's life, too. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. She has no right to say that after everything she's done. "I know," Madison interrupted, her voice sharp. "But she's not going to give up that easily. She never does." Later that day, Nathaniel couldn't shake his anger. Dorothy's interference was a direct threat to the progress he had made with Madison and Harper. He decided to meet with his lawyer to understand his options. If Dorothy intended to push her way back into their lives, he needed to be ready. "Dorothy has no legal standing," the lawyer explained after Nathaniel outlined the situation. "She's not Harper's guardian, and unless Madison decides otherwise, she has no claim to involvement." Nathaniel nodded, relieved but still wary. Dorothy might not have legal grounds, but her manipulative tactics had already caused irreparable damage in the past. He couldn't afford to underestimate her. That evening, Nathaniel returned to the apartment to find Madison sitting at the table, her shoulders tense as she sifted through a pile of mail. Among the usual envelopes was a sleek, cream-colored one that caught Nathaniel's attention. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the envelope. Madison sighed, sliding it across the table toward him. "It's an invitation. From Dorothy. She's hosting some kind of charity gala and wants me to attend." Nathaniel frowned. "Why would she invite you to something like that?" "She said it's a chance to bury the hatchet," Madison replied bitterly. "But we both know that's not what she really wants." Nathaniel's mind raced. A public event meant exposure, something Dorothy could easily use to manipulate the narrative and paint herself as the victim. "You're not going, are you?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Madison shook her head. "Of course not. But knowing Dorothy, she'll find another way to get what she wants." As the days passed, Dorothy's presence loomed like a dark cloud over their lives. Harper remained blissfully unaware, her days filled with school and playtime with Nathaniel, but Madison grew more withdrawn, her anxiety bubbling just beneath the surface. One evening, as Nathaniel helped Harper with her homework, Madison sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television. Nathaniel watched her out of the corner of his eye, the tension in her posture unmistakable. After Harper went to bed, he sat beside Madison, placing a hand on her arm. "Talk to me," he said gently. "What's going on?" Madison exhaled, leaning back against the cushions. "It's Dorothy. She knows how to push my buttons, how to make me doubt myself. Even when I know I'm doing the right thing, she makes me feel like I'm failing." Nathaniel's grip on her arm tightened slightly. "You're not failing. Madison, you've done an incredible job with Harper. Don't let her make you think otherwise." Madison met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "It's not just about me anymore. I'm scared she'll try to get to Harper. She's already started planting doubts, and Harper's just a kid. She doesn't know any better." "She won't get to Harper," Nathaniel said firmly. "I won't let her." But Dorothy was nothing if not persistent. The next day, while Nathaniel was at a meeting, Dorothy showed up at Harper's school, waiting near the gates when classes let out. Harper, excited by the attention of an older woman who seemed to know her, chatted freely with Dorothy. Madison arrived just in time to see them talking, her heart leaping into her throat. She rushed over, pulling Harper to her side. "Dorothy," Madison said through gritted teeth, "what are you doing here?" Dorothy gave a saccharine smile. "I was just introducing myself to my granddaughter. She's delightful." "Madison, you've done such a good job raising her." Madison's hand tightened on Harper's shoulder. "You stay away from her. Do you hear me? If I see you near her again, I'll call the police." Dorothy's smile didn't falter, but her eyes gleamed with malice. "I'm only here to help, Madison. One day. Harper will understand that." Without another word, Madison turned and walked away, Harper clinging to her side. Her heart pounded as she buckled Harper into the car, the weight of Dorothy's threat pressing down on her. That evening, Madison told Nathaniel what had happened, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "She's not going to stop, Nathaniel. She'll keep coming after us until she gets what she wants." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with determination. "Then, we'll stop her. Together." Madison looked at him, her expression filled with both doubt and a flicker of hope. "I don't know how we're going to do this." Nathaniel took her hand, his voice steady. "We'll figure it out. Dorothy doesn't get to control your life anymore, Madison. Not now, not ever." For the first time in years, Madison felt a glimmer of strength she hadn't known she still had. With Nathaniel by her side, she dared to believe they could finally break free of Dorothy's grasp. Nathaniel paced the small living room of Madison's apartment, his mind racing. Dorothy's intrusion at Harper's school had been a stark reminder of just how dangerous her influence could be. She had always been relentless, and her ability to manipulate people and situations had cost him and Madison years of their lives. He couldn't allow her to derail the fragile progress they were making now. Madison sat on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself as if to ward off the weight of her fears. Harper was asleep in her room, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that had unfolded earlier that day. Nathaniel stopped pacing and turned to Madison. "I'm going to deal with her," he said, his voice firm. Madison looked up at him, her eyes tired but skeptical. "And how exactly are you going to do that? Dorothy doesn't back down. She twists everything to suit her narrative." Nathaniel sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. "I know how she operates, but this time, I'm not letting her win. She's already taken too much from us." Madison shook her head, her expression conflicted. "Nathaniel, I don't want Harper to get caught in the middle of this. She's just a kid. She doesn't deserve to deal with Dorothy's schemes." "She won't," Nathaniel promised. "Nathaniel, I'll make sure of it." The next morning, Nathaniel made a call to one of his most trusted private investigators. If they were going to stop Dorothy, they needed leverage, something solid that could disarm her manipulations once and for all. "I need everything you can find on Dorothy Brown," he told the investigator. "Her finances, her connections, any skeletons in her closet. Leave no stone unturned." The investigator agreed, and as Nathaniel hung up, he felt a flicker of hope. If Dorothy had spent years using secrets and lies to control people, perhaps it was time for her to face the consequences that evening. Nathaniel returned to the apartment to find Madison sitting at the table, sorting through old documents. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "I found some of Dorothy's old letters," she said, gesturing to a small stack of yellowed envelopes. "They're from when she was trying to convince me to give Harper up for adoption." Nathaniel's jaw tightened as he picked up one of the letters. Reading the cold, calculated words, Dorothy had written about how a child would ruin Madison's life, how she wasn't ready to be a mother, and how Dorothy's way was the only solution. "She's ruthless," Nathaniel said, setting the letter down. "But these might help us if she tries to claim any right to Harper. These letters show exactly how she's treated you, and how little she cared about Harper's well-being." Madison nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "It's hard to look at them, but you're right. We need to be ready for whatever she tries next." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Nathaniel worked with his investigator while Madison focused on protecting Harper. They coordinated with the school to ensure Dorothy couldn't approach her again, and Madison spoke to a lawyer about filing a restraining order. Despite the chaos, Nathaniel made a point to spend time with Harper each evening. They played board games, read stories, and worked on her family drawing. Madison often watched from a distance, her heart softening as she saw how much effort Nathaniel was putting into building a relationship with their daughter. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Harper handed Nathaniel her finished drawing. It showed a small house with 3 figures standing in front, a man, a woman, and a little girl holding their hands. "This is us," Harper said proudly. "Our family." Nathaniel felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the drawing. He glanced at Madison, who stood nearby, her expression unreadable. "It's perfect, Harper," he said, pulling her into a hug. "Just like you." A week later, the private investigator called with a report. Nathaniel met him at a quiet cafe, his nerves on edge as he awaited the findings. "She's not as untouchable as she seems," the investigator said, sliding a folder across the table. "Her finances are a mess. She's been funneling money into shady investments, And there are a few questionable dealings with her charity events. If you wanted, you could use this to make things very uncomfortable for her." Nathaniel flipped through the folder, his mind racing. This was exactly what they needed, proof of Dorothy's manipulations and misconduct. But as he closed the folder, he hesitated. Dorothy had caused immense pain, but he wasn't sure if exposing her would solve everything or create even more chaos. When he returned to Madison's apartment, he told her about the investigators' findings. Madison listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "So, what do we do?" she asked. "Do we confront her with this? Take it to the authorities?" Nathaniel sat beside her, his voice calm but firm. "We'll use it if we have to, but my first priority is protecting you and Harper. Dorothy needs to know that she can't manipulate us anymore." Madison nodded, though her hands fidgeted in her lap. "I just want her out of our lives, Nathaniel, for good. And she will be," he promised. "We're going to make sure of it." That night, as Nathaniel lay awake, he thought about the woman who had once held so much power over their lives. Dorothy had built her world on lies and control, but now he and Madison were finally in a position to fight back. It wouldn't be easy, but for Harper and for the future they were rebuilding, it was a battle worth fighting. The tension in Madison's apartment was palpable. Dorothy's persistence had been a constant weight on their lives. But now, with the investigators' report in Nathaniel's hands, they had a chance to fight back. Yet the question lingered. How far were they willing to go? Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table, poring over the documents one more time. Madison stood by the counter, nervously stirring a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Harper was in her room, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside her safe little world. "She'll try something else," Madison said, breaking the silence. "Dorothy doesn't back down easily, you know that." Nathaniel looked up, his expression resolute. "She's already crossed the line by approaching Harper. If she tries anything else, we'll use this." He tapped the folder of evidence on the table. "It's time we put an end to her games." Madison hesitated, her fingers tightening around her mug. "I just want this to be over. I'm tired, Nathaniel. I've been fighting her for so long." Nathaniel stood and crossed the room to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore. We'll face this together." The next day, Nathaniel decided to take the first step. He called Dorothy, arranging to meet her at her estate. Madison was hesitant about the plan, but she trusted Nathaniel's judgment when he arrived at Dorothy's imposing home. She greeted him with her usual air of superiority. "Nathaniel," she said smoothly, gesturing for him to enter. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" He followed her into the sitting room, his movements measured and deliberate. "We need to talk," he said, his tone firm. Dorothy settled into her chair, her sharp eyes narrowing. "About Madison and Harper, I presume." Nathaniel didn't sit. Instead, he placed the folder on the coffee table between them and opened it, revealing the damning evidence. Dorothy's confident demeanor faltered for the briefest moment, but she quickly composed herself. "What is this?" she asked, her voice laced with feigned innocence. "It's everything," Nathaniel replied. "Your financial misconduct, your shady charity dealings, all of it. You've built your empire on lies and manipulation, Dorothy. And if you come near Madison or Harper again, this goes public." Dorothy leaned back, her expression hardening. "You're bluffing. Try me," Nathaniel said, his voice cold. "You've already taken so much from us. I won't let you hurt them anymore." For a moment, Dorothy said nothing, her eyes scanning the documents. Then she smirked, though it lacked its usual confidence. "You've always been so dramatic. Nathaniel, do you really think this will stop me?" Nathaniel leaned forward, his voice low but filled with conviction. "I'm not the same person I was years ago. You don't scare me anymore, Dorothy. Stay away from them. This is your only warning." Dorothy's smirk faded, replaced by a steely glare. "You think you've won, don't you?" "This isn't about winning," Nathaniel said, standing tall. "It's about protecting my family, and I will do whatever it takes to keep them safe." Back at the apartment, Madison paced nervously, waiting for Nathaniel's return. When he finally walked through the door, she rushed to meet him, her eyes filled with worry. "How did it go?" she asked. Nathaniel set the folder on the counter and exhaled deeply. "I confronted her. She knows we have the evidence. She won't back down easily. but I made it clear that if she tries anything, she'll face the consequences." Madison nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "Do you think she'll stop?" "She'll have to," Nathaniel said, his voice firm. "She's playing a dangerous game and she knows it." Over the next few days, life began to settle into a cautious rhythm. Nathaniel focused on spending time with Harper, helping her with school projects and indulging her endless curiosity. Madison, though still wary, found herself softening toward Nathaniel as he proved time and again that he was committed to being there for them. One evening, as Harper worked on another family drawing, Madison sat beside Nathaniel on the couch. "She's happier," Madison said softly, watching Harper with a faint smile. "She talks about you all the time." Nathaniel looked at Madison, his expression earnest. "She's incredible, Madison, and that's because of you. You've done everything for her." Madison shook her head. "I've done my best, but I'm realizing that maybe I don't have to do it alone anymore." Nathaniel reached for her hand, his grip gentle. "You don't. Not anymore." But their fragile peace was shattered one afternoon when Madison received a call from the school. Dorothy had sent a letter directly to Harper, bypassing the school's security measures. The letter was filled with manipulative language, painting Dorothy as a caring grandmother who only wanted what was best for Harper. Madison's hands trembled as she read the letter aloud to Nathaniel. "She's trying to turn Harper against me," Madison said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening. "That's it. She's gone too far. What are we going to do?" Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel stood, his eyes blazing with determination. "We're going to end this once and for all." That evening, Nathaniel and Madison sat together, strategizing their next move. It was clear that Dorothy wouldn't stop until she was forced to. The evidence they had gathered was their strongest weapon, and now, it was time to use it. As they worked late into the night, Harper peeked out from her room, her sleepy eyes filled with curiosity. "What are you doing?" she asked. Madison smiled gently, motioning for Harper to come closer. "Just some grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Harper climbed onto Madison's lap, resting her head against her shoulder. "Is it about the mean lady?" Madison exchanged a glance with Nathaniel, then kissed Harper's forehead. "Don't worry, baby. Mommy and Daddy are taking care of everything." Nathaniel leaned over, brushing a hand through Harper's hair. "You're safe, Harper. That's all that matters." As Harper drifted back to sleep in Madison's arms, Nathaniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Dorothy's games were coming to an end, and this time, she wouldn't win. The morning after the letter incident, the atmosphere in the apartment was thick with tension. Madison couldn't shake the anger boiling inside her. Dorothy's audacity to reach out to Harper directly was more than a simple boundary crossed. It was a calculated move to undermine everything Madison had fought to protect. Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the next steps they had prepared to counter Dorothy's manipulations. Madison joined him, placing a cup of coffee in front of him, though her own hands trembled as she held her mug. "I can't believe she's trying to paint herself as some benevolent figure," Madison muttered, her voice sharp with frustration. "After everything she's done." Nathaniel reached for her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. "She's desperate, Madison. She's losing control and she knows it." Madison nodded, though her doubt lingered. I don't know how to keep Harper safe from this. Dorothy is relentless. We're not letting her win," Nathaniel said firmly. "This ends now." Later that day, as Madison sorted through old files and documents, looking for anything that might strengthen their case, she stumbled upon an envelope she didn't recognize. It was tucked inside a box of Harper's baby things, its edges yellowed with age. Curious, she opened it and pulled out a letter written in Dorothy's unmistakable handwriting. The words stopped Madison cold. "Madison, what you don't know can't hurt you, but it can protect Harper. Trust me, you're better off not digging too deeply into Nathaniel's life. Some truths are best left buried. Let him go for both your sakes." Madison's heart pounded as she reread the letter. Dorothy's cryptic warning didn't just reek of manipulation. It hinted at secrets Madison hadn't dared to uncover. Her mind raced with questions. What was Dorothy hiding? What truth had she tried to bury? Madison hurried to the living room, clutching the letter. Nathaniel looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowing at her expression. "What is it?" he asked, standing as she approached. Madison thrust the letter toward him. I found this in Harper's Things. Dorothy wrote it." Nathaniel took the letter and read it, his jaw tightening with every word. "What does she mean by truths best left buried?" "That's what I want to know," Madison said, her voice trembling. "What else is she hiding from us, Nathaniel? What else don't we know?" The discovery of the letter reignited Nathaniel's determination. He contacted his investigator, instructing him to dig deeper into Dorothy's past. Meanwhile, Madison couldn't help but replay every interaction she'd ever had with her grandmother, searching for clues she might have missed. That evening, the investigator called with a breakthrough. "It's not just financial misconduct," he explained. "Dorothy has ties to a number of questionable activities, but there's one thing that stands out. Something from years ago." Nathaniel's grip on the phone tightened. "What is it?" "There's evidence that Dorothy orchestrated the avalanche," the investigator said bluntly. "It wasn't an accident. She arranged for it to happen to separate you and Madison." Nathaniel froze, his mind reeling. "You're saying she caused the avalanche deliberately?" "It seems so," the investigator confirmed. "I'm still piecing everything together, but the connections are there." When Nathaniel relayed the news to Madison, she was initially too stunned to speak. The avalanche had been the defining tragedy of her life, the moment that had torn everything apart. To learn that it wasn't a cruel twist of fate, but a calculated act of malice was almost too much to process. "She wanted to make sure we were separated forever," Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't care who got hurt. She didn't care about me." Nathaniel placed his hands on her shoulders, his gaze steady. "She's not going to hurt you anymore. We have the truth now, Madison, and we're going to use it." Madison looked up at him, her eyes filled with both anger and determination. "She's going to pay for this. For everything." The next day, Nathaniel and Madison met with their lawyer, presenting the evidence of Dorothy's involvement in the avalanche along with the financial misconduct and manipulation. The lawyer assured them they had a strong case to file for a restraining order and, if necessary, pursue legal action. But for Madison, the legalities weren't enough. She needed to confront Dorothy face to face. "She needs to see what she's done," Madison told Nathaniel that evening. "She needs to understand the damage she's caused." Nathaniel hesitated. "Are you sure? You don't owe her anything, Madison. She doesn't deserve your forgiveness." "It's not about forgiveness," Madison said firmly. "It's about closure. I need to tell her that she can't control me anymore." Nathaniel nodded, his respect for her strength growing. "Then we'll face her together." The confrontation took place at Dorothy's estate. Just as the sun was setting, Madison stood tall, her hand firmly grasping Nathaniel's as they entered the grand sitting room where Dorothy waited. Dorothy's expression remained calm, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Madison? Nathaniel? What a surprise." Madison didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I know the truth, Dorothy. About the avalanche. About everything." Dorothy's composure faltered, but she quickly regained it. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "You don't have to admit it," Nathaniel said coldly. "We have the evidence, and trust me, it's enough to ruin you." Dorothy's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Madison stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion, but steady in its resolve. "You've spent your entire life trying to control me, trying to shape me into something you could use, but you failed. I'm done letting you manipulate me, and you will never, ever come near Harper again." Dorothy opened her mouth to respond, but Madison raised a hand, silencing her. "This is the last time you'll see me, Dorothy. You don't own me, and you don't own my family." With that, Madison turned and walked out, her head held high. Nathaniel followed, his hand on her back as they left the estate, and the darkness of Dorothy's influence behind them. That night, as they sat together on the couch, Harper curled up between them. Madison felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt free. Nathaniel looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You were incredible today." Madison gave a small smile, her gaze softening. "It wasn't just me. I couldn't have done it without you." Nathaniel kissed the top of Harper's head, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We're a team now. Madison, and nothing is going to change that. The morning after their confrontation with Dorothy felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the air. Madison woke up earlier than usual, stepping into the small kitchen to brew a pot of coffee. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom, a release from Dorothy's suffocating grasp. Nathaniel joined her a few moments later, his hair still slightly tousled from sleep. He leaned against the counter, watching her with a faint smile. "You seem different today," he said softly. Madison glanced at him, her lips curving into a small, genuine smile. "I feel different for the first time. I feel like I can breathe again." Nathaniel reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "That's because you stood up to her. You took your life back, Madison. You should be proud of yourself." She met his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." Nathaniel's smile widened. "We did it together, and now we can focus on what really matters." As if on cue, the sound of Harper's small footsteps echoed from the hallway. She appeared in the doorway, her hair a mess, and her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Good morning," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. Nathaniel bent down to scoop her up, planting a kiss on her forehead. "Good morning, sunshine. Did you sleep well?" Harper nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Can we do something fun today?" Madison chuckled, setting 2 plates of toast on the table. "What did you have in mind?" Harper perked up, her eyes brightening. "Can we go to the zoo? I've never been to one before." Nathaniel and Madison exchanged a look, both smiling at her enthusiasm. "The zoo it is," Nathaniel said, ruffling Harper's hair. "Go get ready." Harper squealed with excitement, running off to her room to prepare. The trip to the zoo was everything Harper had hoped for. She marveled at the giraffes, laughed at the antics of the monkeys, and squealed with delight when a peacock fanned its feathers. Nathaniel and Madison followed her from exhibit to exhibit, their shared smiles and laughter making the day feel like a glimpse into the family they were becoming. As they sat on a bench eating ice cream, Harper turned to Nathaniel, her face serious. "Daddy, are you going to stay with us forever?" Nathaniel's heart swelled at her words. He set his ice cream down and pulled her into his lap, looking into her eyes. "Yes, Harper, I'm staying forever, I promise." Madison watched the exchange, her chest tightening with emotion. For so long, she had shouldered everything alone. But now, seeing the bond between Nathaniel and Harper, she felt a sense of relief and hope. That evening, back at the apartment, Harper worked on another family drawing while Nathaniel and Madison cleaned up after dinner. The comfortable rhythm of their interactions felt almost natural, as if the years apart were slowly being bridged. As Madison dried the last dish, she turned to Nathaniel, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we found a bigger place." Nathaniel looked at her, his brows lifting in surprise. "You mean, together?" Madison hesitated, then nodded. "Harper loves having you here. And honestly, so do I. This apartment has been our home, but I think we're ready for the next step." Nathaniel stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her arm. "I would love that, Madison. More than anything." The days that followed were filled with discussions about neighborhoods, schools, and the kind of home they wanted. Madison was cautious, wanting to ensure that any changes would be in Harper's best interest, while Nathaniel was eager to create a space where they could finally build the life they'd been denied for so long. One evening, as they tucked Harper into bed, she held up her latest drawing, a detailed picture of a house with 3 smiling figures standing in front. "This is our new house," Harper said proudly. "It has a big backyard, and my room is pink." Madison laughed softly, brushing Harper's hair from her face. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. I think we'll have to find a house just like this." Nathaniel leaned down, kissing Harper's forehead. "And we will, I promise." While the search for their new home continued, Nathaniel made another important decision. He began reorganizing his work schedule, delegating responsibilities to his team so he could spend more time with Madison and Harper. The long hours that had once defined his life were no longer a priority. His family was. Madison noticed the change, and couldn't help but feel a growing respect for him. "You're really serious about this," she said one evening as they sat together on the couch. Nathaniel nodded, his expression earnest. "I am. Work used to be everything to me. But now I see what I was missing. I don't want to miss another moment with you or Harper." Madison's hand found his, and she gave it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you." One afternoon, they visited a house that immediately felt right. It was a cozy 2-story home with a large backyard, plenty of sunlight, and enough space for Harper to grow. As they walked through the rooms, Harper's excitement was infectious. "This is it," she declared, running through the living room. "This is our house." Madison and Nathaniel exchanged a look, both smiling. It wasn't just a house. It was a fresh start, a place where they could leave the shadows of the past behind and create new memories. That night, as they finalized the paperwork, Madison leaned against Nathaniel, her head resting on his shoulder. "I never thought we'd get here," she admitted softly, "but I'm glad we did." Nathaniel kissed the top of her head, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "Me too. This is just the beginning, Madison. For all of us." And for the first time in years, Madison believed him. The first morning in their new house was one of quiet joy. Sunlight poured through the windows, bathing the cozy living room in a warm glow. Harper was the first to wake, her excitement too great to let her sleep any longer. She raced through the house, her footsteps echoing as she explored every corner, her laughter filling the space. Nathaniel found her in the backyard, barefoot on the grass, twirling in the sunlight. "Daddy, this is the best house ever," she exclaimed, her face glowing with happiness. He chuckled, ruffling her hair. "I'm glad you like it. It's our home now." Madison appeared at the back door, holding a steaming mug of coffee, a soft smile on her face as she watched them. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt at peace. The new house wasn't just a physical space. It was a symbol of the fresh start they were creating together. Over the next few weeks, the three of them settled into a routine. Nathaniel continued to adjust his work schedule, spending as much time as possible at home. Madison found herself relaxing into this new chapter, allowing herself to trust Nathaniel more each day. Harper, as always, was the glue that held them together. Her boundless energy and unfiltered joy made every moment brighter. She decorated her new room with drawings, many of them featuring the three of them as a family. One particularly colorful piece was proudly displayed on the refrigerator, showing their house with the words, "Our happy home," scrawled underneath in her uneven handwriting one evening after Harper had gone to bed. Nathaniel and Madison sat on the couch, their conversation quiet but filled with warmth. Madison rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder, feeling a closeness she hadn't experienced in years. "You're really here," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Nathaniel placed his hand over hers, squeezing gently. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere." Madison smiled, though a flicker of doubt lingered. "It still feels surreal, after everything we've been through. I'm scared it's all going to fall apart." Nathaniel turned to her, his expression serious. "It won't. I know I've let you down before, Madison, but I'm not that man anymore. I've seen what I could have lost, what I almost did lose. You and Harper are my priority now, always." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she nodded. "I believe you." The next day, Madison received a surprising phone call. It was from the lawyer handling their case against Dorothy, informing her that Dorothy had agreed to a settlement. She would sign a legally binding agreement to stay away from Madison, Harper, and Nathaniel, effectively cutting ties with their lives. Madison was stunned. "She's really giving up?" she asked, barely able to believe it. "She knows she has no choice," the lawyer explained. "The evidence you provided was overwhelming. She's protecting herself by walking away quietly." Madison relayed the news to Nathaniel, who was equally surprised but relieved. "This means she's finally out of our lives," he said, pulling Madison into a hug. "We can move forward without looking over our shoulders." To celebrate their newfound freedom, Nathaniel planned a small family dinner at their new house. He even attempted to cook, much to Harper's amusement. "Are you sure you know how to do this, Daddy?" she teased, watching him struggle to chop vegetables. "Hey, I'm a fast learner," Nathaniel said, grinning as he wiped his hands on a towel. "Just wait and see." Madison laughed as she set the table, feeling lighter than she had in years. The dinner wasn't perfect. Nathaniel's cooking left much to be desired, but the laughter and love that filled the room more than made up for it. As the evening wound down, the three of them sat together on the couch. Harper nestled between them. She yawned, her eyelids growing heavy as she leaned against Madison. Today was the best day ever, Harper mumbled, her voice drowsy. Madison kissed her forehead. I'm glad you think so, sweetheart. Harper looked up at Nathaniel, her small hand reaching for his. You're going to stay forever. Right, Daddy. Nathaniel's throat tightened with emotion as he wrapped his hand around hers. Forever, Harper, I promise. Satisfied, Harper drifted off to sleep, her breathing soft and even. Madison looked at Nathaniel, her eyes filled with gratitude. She's so happy, Madison whispered. And it's because of you. Nathaniel shook his head. It's because of us. We're doing this together. Madison smiled, her heart full. For the first time, she truly believed that their new life was just beginning. Free from the shadows of the past, the days in their new home blended into a seamless rhythm of laughter, love, and quiet moments of reflection. The scars of the past didn't disappear overnight, but with each passing day, they felt less like wounds and more like stories, a part of their history that shaped, but no longer defined, them. Harper thrived in her new environment, her joy radiating through the house. She spent hours in the backyard, creating imaginary worlds and concocting elaborate plans for family adventures. Madison and Nathaniel often joined her, rediscovering the simplicity of happiness in shared moments. One sunny afternoon, Nathaniel surprised both Harper and Madison by announcing a family outing to the beach. It wasn't far from their new home, but the promise of sandcastles and waves lit up Harper's face with excitement. I'm going to build the biggest castle ever, Harper declared as they packed a bag with towels and snacks. Nathaniel grinned, ruffling her hair. I believe you, but I think you're going to need some help, Madison chuckled. Watching their easy banter, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years, a sense of security and belonging she had feared she might never find again. At the beach, Harper wasted no time diving into her project. With a small bucket and spade in hand, she directed Nathaniel and Madison as they worked together to build an intricate sandcastle. Nathaniel's attempts to sculpt a turret earned Harper's laughter, and Madison's steady hands turned simple shapes into works of art. When the castle was complete, Harper stood back, her hands on her hips. It's perfect, she declared, a proud smile on her face. Madison knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. It's the best castle I've ever seen. Nathaniel leaned down, brushing sand from his hands. I think this calls for a celebration. Who's ready for ice cream? Harper's eyes lit up. Me? Can I have chocolate and strawberry? Of course, Nathaniel said, standing and offering her his hand. Let's go, as they sat on a wooden bench overlooking the ocean. Their ice creams melting in the warm sun, Madison found herself marveling at the moment. The weight of the past felt distant, the present filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. You know, she said, turning to Nathaniel, if someone had told me a year ago that we'd be here, I wouldn't have believed them. Nathaniel looked at her, his expression soft. Neither would I, but I'm grateful every day that we found our way back to each other. Madison smiled, her heart swelling. Me too. That evening, back at the house, Harper insisted on drawing another family picture to commemorate their day at the beach. She worked diligently at the kitchen table while Nathaniel and Madison cleaned up after dinner. She's been so happy lately, Madison said, her voice quiet. It's like a light's been turned on inside her. Nathaniel nodded, his gaze following Harper as she concentrated on her drawing. She's incredible, Madison. And that's because of you. You gave her so much love, even when it was just the two of you. Madison shook her head, her eyes shimmering with emotion. I tried, but having you here, it's made all the difference. Nathaniel reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. We're a family now. That's all that matters. When Harper finished her drawing, she proudly held it up for them to see. It depicted the three of them standing on a beach, the ocean behind them, and a large sandcastle in the foreground. Above their heads, in bright, colorful letters, she had written, Forever Family. Madison's heart swelled as she knelt down and pulled Harper into a hug. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Nathaniel crouched beside them, his voice thick with emotion. It's perfect, just like you, Harper giggled, wrapping her small arms around both of them. I love you, Mommy. I love you, Daddy. Madison and Nathaniel exchanged a glance, their hearts full as they embraced their daughter. In that moment, everything felt right, complete. as the night settled and Harper drifted off to sleep. Madison and Nathaniel sat on the porch, the quiet hum of the neighborhood surrounding them. The stars above were bright, their light mirrored in the peaceful glow of their home. "I never thought I'd have this again," Madison admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A family, a place that feels like home." Nathaniel turned to her, his hand reaching for hers. "You deserve this, Madison. You and Harper deserve everything. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you both know that." Madison leaned against him, her eyes closing as she let the warmth of his presence envelop her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for fighting for us. For staying." Nathaniel kissed the top of her head, his voice filled with quiet determination. Always. The new chapter they had begun wasn't without its challenges, but together, they were ready to face whatever came their way. Their story, once marked by pain and separation, had transformed into one of healing, love, and hope. And as they sat together under the stars, Madison knew with certainty that they had finally found their forever home, not just in the house they shared, but in each other.